ni. Na fe. A felly, os nag ych chi'n hapus, mae cyfle chi fynd nawr. Llwch chi adael cyn bod ni'n dechrau. Yeah, a very, very warm welcome to you one and all to this online launch of Ffynnonnau Byw. Ffynnonnau Byw, wrth gwrs, yw apêl arbennig un debrannu bynwyr Cymraeg sy'n rhoi cyfle i ni unwaith eto fel eglwysi rannu bynwyr i gefnogi gwaith allweddol Cymorth Cristnogol gyda rai o gymunedau clotaf yn byd ni. A'r tro yma, Colombia, wrth gwrs, yw'r wlad sy'n cael sylw gennym. Gwlad yng ngogledd orllewin de America, ddylwn i ddweud, lle mae Cymorth Cristnogol yn gweithio ers dros 20 mlynedd. Ffynnonnau Byw highlights some of the key work of Christian Aid partners in Colombia. And joining us this evening, we have Nathalie Mercier, the Regional Program Manager for Christian Aid in Colombia. So we welcome Nathalie, and we will have an opportunity later on to hear Nathalie speak about some of the challenges that she and her team face in Colombia. A fe fydd na gyfle chi hefyd I chi ofyn unrhyw gwestiwn neu wneud rhyw sylw. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. Ond cyn hynny, ac wy'n cymryd, mae oedd ddim di weld, rwy'n cymryd bod yma. Cyn hynny, fe hoffwn I groesawu Andrew Sully, sydd yn bennaeth dros dro Cymorth Cristnogol yn Cymru. A mae Andrew yn mynd i'n arwain ni yn y defosiwn agoriadol. It's a pleasure to welcome Andrew Sully, who is heading the Christian Aid team in Wales in the absence of Mary McNeil. And I'm inviting Andrew to lead us now in our opening devotion, hoping that he is here. O ti'n Andrew, croeso cynnes iawn.
Diolch yn galon, Robin. Mae'n hyfryd I bod efo chi heno. Dwi wedi newydd seiclo yn ôl o Caerdydd Canolog efo tren yn hwyr yn dod I lawr o Amwyddig, ond does dim syndod yna. Ond dwi'n yma o hyd, o dwi'n yma mewn pryd, dylwn I ddweud. A dwi'n mynd I dechrau efo rhai o gweddiau sy'n ar y we, sy'n Lansiad Ffynhonnau Byw. Felly, gweddiwn, let us pray. Duw cariad, bydded un hapêl Ffynnonnau Byw, agor ein llygaid yn clistiau, I weld y byd y oed ti yn ei weld, a chlywed y lleisiau y oed ti yn ei glywed. I sefyll mewn un dod gyda chymunedau yng Colombia ac o gylch y byd, I ymateb i'w hangen, I wrando ar ei deheadau am gyfiawnder, I rannu ei dicter a'i gobeithion, I ymddiried ynddynt, a chydweithio gyda'r hwy dros y fori gwell, gan helpu dwyn y creadigaeth gyfan I un dod yng Nghrist. Tra byddwn ni'n codi ein llais dros ein hawl I ymwneud I hyn a fyddwn, oed ti'n gweld yr rhai sy'n cael ei bygwth a'i lladd am siarad dros pobl heb lais. Tra byddwn ni'n dadlau am werth cyfiawnder rhywedd, oed ti'n gweld y ragedd sy'n cael ei gwahodd rhag perchen tir. Tra byddwn ni'n chwilio am y addysg orau i'w plant ni. Oed ti'n gweld yr rhai na fydd byth yn goroesi plentyndod. Felly, Dduw cariad, am hob genhedlaeth dangosais dy hun fel un sy'n cofio'r trawd a'r newynog, yn amddiffyn y bregus a'r gwan, ac yn anrhydeddu'r rhai hynny sy'n neb. Ac am hob oes gwahoddais rai I ymuno â thi yn y gwaith o sicrhau cyfiawnder a heddwch, urddas a hydreddoldeb i bawb. Dyn ni'n gweddio trwy Iesu Grist ein hargroer. Amen. Ti'n wedi miwtio dy hun, Robin?
Right, yeah, fine. Iawn, diolch yn fawr iawn, Andrew, am hynna. I'n gwerthfawrogi fawr iawn, yn gwerthfawrogi dy bresenoldeb di gyda ni hyn, o dy gefnogaeth di i ni hefyd fel enwad a gyda'r apêl arbennig yma. Wel, fe gawn ni gyfle mewn ychydig funudau i edrych ar ffilm yr apêl a baratoi gan Rodri. Mae'n siŵr bod mae nifer ohonoch chi wedi gweld y ffilm yn barod, ymddiheiriadau bod chi'n gofyn gwylio fe eto, ond wy'n credu bod e'n crynhoi yn dda rai o'r prosiectau mae partneriad Cymorth Cristnogol yn ei gweithredu yng Colombia. A maen nhw'n brosiectau, wrth gwrs, mae'n bwysig bod ni'n cofio hyn, maen nhw'n brosiectau sydd yn digwydd mewn meysydd lle mae Cymorth Cristnogol yn gweithio ynddyn nhw erbyn hyn ar draws y byd. Yn dyfa a chymed ohonyn nhw fel byddech chi'n disgwyl yn ymateb i her y newid hinsawdd. Felly ni'n mynd i gael cyfle i edrych ar chymod a sôn am waith fel diogelu, byw amrywiaethau rhyfeddol byd natur a systemau eco allweddol sydd o dan fygythiad yn Colombia. Y gwaith sy'n cael ei warchod ffynhonnellau dŵr a phrosesau cynnyrchu bwyd, a chefnogi pobl sy'n cael ei effeithio gan ddiwydiant, a cryfhau cymunedau, a rhoi llais a grym i bobl sydd yn draddodiadol heb sydd ddim wedi cael llais a ddim wedi cael dylanwad. It's a great pleasure now to introduce the Ffynnonnau Byw video, which gives you a taste of the projects we will be supporting through our appeal. Sgusodwch fi am funud.
Dros y blynyddoedd, mae Undeb Annibynwyr Cymraeg wedi cynnal sawl apêl enwadol i gefnogi gwaith Cymorth Cristnogol yn rai o wledydd tlotaf yn byd. Eleni rydym yn troi yn golygon tuag at Colombia, lle mae Cymorth Cristnogol wedi bod yn gweithio ers dros 20 mlynedd. Bydd llawer o bobl yn cysylltu Colombia gyda gwrthdaro a thrais gwleidyddol, rhywbeth a fi'n amlwg yn y wlad am dros hanner can mlynedd. Ond gyda arwyddo cytundeb heddwch yn 2016, mae'r wlad bellach yn mwynhau cyfnod cymharol eddychlon. Ac er bod Cymorth Cristnogol yn dal i weithio gyda chymunedau i sicrhau heddwch, mae wedi rhoi'r cyfle iddyn nhw i ganolbwyntio hefyd ar rai o'r anghyfiawnderau a'r anghyfartaleddau sydd yn effeithio cymaint o bobl gyffredin y wlad. Materion fel hawliau merched, hawliau pobl leiafrifol, hawl pobl i dir, yr amgylchedd a gwarchod systemau eco pwysig sydd yn y wlad. Rydyn ni yng Nghymru wedi hen arfer gyda effeithiau gweithiau glo brig ar ein cymunedau ac ar yr amgylchedd. Dychmygwch sefyllfa yng Colombia lle mae yna waith glo brig enfawr y mwyaf yn Lladin America, sydd wedi cael ail fywyd fel petai yn dilyn sancsiynau yn erbyn Rwsia yn allforio glo. Yn ogystal â llygru'r dŵr a'r tir, a chyfrannu'n uniongyrchol at newid hinsawdd, mae'r gwaith wedi dadleoli 1,500 o bobl. Llawer o'r bobl yna yn ddisgynyddion Africanaidd o'r caethweision a ddaeth i'r wlad gant a mwy o flynyddoedd yn ôl. Mae gan y bobl yma gyfoeth o draddodiad a hanes sy'n gysylltiedig â'r tir maen nhw wedi bod yn byw arno, ac maen nhw'n mewn perygl o golli hynny. Felly mae un o bartneriaid Cymorth Cristnogol wedi bod yn gweithio gyda'r gwragedd yn y cymunedau yma i sicrhau bod y diwylliant pwysig yma ddim yn cael ei golli.
Nacimos porque vimos la necesidad de organizarnos, primeramente organizarnos. Como la misma organización nos dice, mujeres afrocampesinas. Yo les decía a ellas, si nosotros que somos mujeres dadoras de vida, labramos la tierra que da fruto, organicémonos.
Involucramos bastante a los niños, a las niñas y a los jóvenes, enseñándolos a amar el territorio, que ellos vengan, que vean lo valioso que es, que compartan nuestros espacios, que vean que sí es de gran satisfacción.
Lo que queremos hacer con esta tienda o que se convierta en un sitio donde toda la comunidad pueda beneficiarse de todo lo que hagamos acá. Y más que todo empoderar a las mujeres, ya que en el medio estamos empoderando a las mujeres también por medio de charlas y de algunos conocimientos, porque en nuestro medio la mujer no manda y ya eso tiene que comenzar a cambiar un poco.
Mae un o bartneriaid Cymorth Cristnogol sy'n arbenigo ym myd y gyfraith wedi bod yn helpu cymunedau sydd â'u cyflenwadau o ddŵr glân yn cael ei effeithio gan fwyn gloddio sy'n digwydd yn agos at y ffynonellau dŵr. Enillwyd achos llys pwysig sydd wedi gorfodi'r llywodraeth i ddilyn canllawiau pendant gwyddonol pan fydden nhw'n trefnu mwyn gloddio. Hefyd fe sicrhawyd bod gan bobl leol lais mewn unrhyw ddatblygiadau mwyn gloddio yn y dyfodol.
La sentencia fue una sentencia que estuvo muy orientada por la Corte para abrir la participación comunitaria en la decisión del territorio de Santurbán. No se puede seguir haciendo acciones, sobre todo en el campo minero, si no hay una consulta con la sociedad local.
Reconoció el derecho a la participación ambiental y eso le permitía, abrió una gran puerta, nunca antes vista.
Mae mudiad Corymbiente yn gweithio yn arbennig gyda merched a phobl ifanc, gyda dulliau ffermio cynnaladwy, ac yn ei annog nhw i wneud llai o ddefnydd o gemegau yn eu tir. Trwy ymdrechio nhw, mae gan y ffermwyr ddigon ar gyfer eu hunan ac ychydig dros ben i werthu yn y marchnadoedd lleol a chael ychydig bach mwy o incwm i'w hunan. Gwerth cydweithio yw'r neges bwysig, a mae'r gwaith wedi rhoi llais a grym i bobl gyffredin.
Todos nuestros niños estaban en una desnutrición muy alta. Ahí fue donde empezamos a implementar mucho más la producción agroecológica, que sembrábamos verduras, hortalizas y las combinábamos con los productos que ya teníamos acá. Y a raíz de eso, pues sabemos que en algunos casos somos unas familias más pequeñas y tenemos buena producción, entonces nos queda un poquito.
Y el excedente se lleva a la Federación de Mercados Agroecológicos Manca, que queda en Bucaramanga. Ahí se hace todo el proceso de comercialización directo, es decir, no hay intermediarios, y eso les genera a ellos una retribución económica que ha generado en los hogares de las mujeres unas transformaciones bastante importantes en los roles de género.
Ha sido una autonomía, porque hemos aprendido ya a ser más independientes y ya pues uno tiene eso ya como más a igual con el compañero, entonces ya lo vamos expresando así y por eso pues hemos generado más ese empoderamiento.
Trwy yn hapêl arbennig eleni Ffynhonnau Byw, mae gyda ni gyfle i gefnogi y bobl hyn a rai tebyg ar draws yn byd ni a rhoi gobaith iddyn nhw am fywyd gwell. Gadewch i ni weithio dros y flwyddyn hon, gadewch i ni gynnal yn gweithgareddau codi arian, gadewch i ni godi ymwybyddiaeth o'r sefyllfa yn y wlad hon ac mewn cymaint o wledydd eraill yn byd ni. Fel mae partneriad Cymorth Cristnogol yng Colombia yn pwysleisio, gyda'n gilydd, fi allwn ni wneud gwahaniaeth mawr.
Iawn. Diolch yn fawr, Rodri, am hwnna. Wel, fel o'n i'n dweud, mae'n siŵr i chi wedi cael cyfle i weld o'r blaen, ond mae fe'n crynhoi yn diwedd chi y gwaith i ni yn cefnogi ac yn gwneud hynny, dwi'n meddwl, mewn ffordd dda iawn, ac mae'n ddim werth i ddangos yn unrhyw weithgarwch codi arian neu hybu'r apêl fyddwch chi'n cynnal. Right, we come now then to perhaps the main part of the evening, and as I said at the beginning, we're very, very pleased to have Nathalie Mercier present with us, the regional manager of the Recordiad in Colombia, and it's a pleasure now to call on Nathalie to speak. Fel o'n i'n dweud yn gynharach hefyd, mae yna gyfle chi i ofyn cwestiynau. Falle byddech chi, os oes cwestiwn gyda chi, neu os byddai'n dod i'ch meddwl chi, neu rhyw synw'n dod i'ch meddwl chi, allwch chi bostio fe yn y chat box, a wedyn allai gyflwyno'r cwestiynau hynny, a wedyn i Nathalie orffen siarad. Nathalie, if I can hand over to you, and give the opportunity to talk a little bit about, the work that you deal with on a day-to-day basis in Colombia, and perhaps a little bit more about these projects that we are supporting through the appeal.
Great, thank you very much. Hello, Shimai. Good afternoon and buenas tardes in Spanish. My name is Nathalie Mercier and I'm based here in Bogota in Colombia. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing here in Colombia, and also mention a little bit about the work in Latin America as a whole. I'll just share my screen. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. And then, sorry, just 1 second. Great, okay. Right, so as I said, I'm based here in Colombia. And in Colombia, we work throughout the country. Colombia is a very big country. It's bigger than France, and it's a lot bigger than the UK. I'm originally from Scotland, but I've lived in Colombia for 2 years and have been in Latin America for 15 years. So Cristnogol in Colombia is part of the Latin America and the Caribbean regional program. And you can see on the map there the American continent. So we are working in Central America, which is in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, in the Caribbean, in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And then in South America, at the moment, just in Colombia, although we also participate in different networks related to the Amazon rainforest, which obviously is in several different countries in South America, in Brazil, in Colombia, Ecuador, etc. So here you can see some examples of our work from across the Latin America and Caribbean region. We work a lot with indigenous communities and also Afro-descendant communities, as you've seen in the video as well. So we work empowering rural women so that they're able to participate in local politics, also raising awareness on violence prevention, and just also advocating in front of local authorities and national authorities to ensure that their rights are being met. So I'll move on to Colombia. So Colombia, you can see in the bottom right of the map, there's a map showing where Colombia is in South America. It's in the top left-hand corner of South America, and it has Pacific coast and also Caribbean coast. The La Guajira region, which you saw in the video, the Afro-descendant women in the video, is right at the top there, that little thin bit at the top of the map, on the kind of in the center and right at the top. That's La Guajira region, and that has Caribbean coast, although the women are a bit more inland. And then the other area that you saw in the video is Bucaramanga, which is a city just very near the Venezuelan border. So Colombia is incredibly biodiverse. It has 96 different ecosystems, and it has 10% of the world's biodiversity. And that includes, as I said before, the Amazon rainforest, which I'm sure you know a lot about. It is the most dangerous country in the world for environmental rights defenders. So it's a big problem with all of the conflict. I'm sure you've heard of the different armed groups that are in Colombia. So land defenders quite often will touch on the interests of very powerful groups, and that makes them quite a vulnerable population. I'll come back to that a bit later on. Some 20% of the population is Afro-descendant, so they're people that that during the 15th, 16th century were brought from Africa to the region. In a lot of cases, like for example, in the case of the women that you saw in the video, they escaped from the slaveholders. So they have this real spirit of, you know, from their ancestral history, they have a real spirit of, you know, strength and resistance, which I think is something that comes across in the video as well. You can see that they're very, very strong women. And some 4% of the population in Colombia is indigenous. The internal armed conflicts lasted for over 50 years, and a peace agreement was signed just still relatively recently in 2016. You know, in theory, the conflict is at an end, but there continue to be certain armed groups in the country, which brings up its own difficulties in the work of partner organizations and in communities. So we work with women and young people, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, LGBTQI groups, human rights defenders, and we have a lot of work with smallholder and subsistence farmers, or campesinos, as they're called here, and civil society groups. So I'm going to mention two areas that we work on in particular. The first is climate justice. So in terms of climate justice, like I said before, there's great biodiversity in Colombia. Nevertheless, due to human activity and climate change, almost half of the ecosystems in Colombia are at risk. and that's obviously including the Amazon rainforest. So our partners work to promote agroecology and climate resilience with communities, as well as strategic litigation, so lawsuits, in cases of environmental defense. And you saw that in the video in the case of the peatlands. And both Christian Aid and partners are involved in key environmental and climate advocacy networks. So networks to protect specific ecosystems, or networks to do advocacy in a particular part of the world. So like, for example, European networks. Also, we're starting to work more with networks in the US as well, and across the Latin America and Caribbean region. And as part of our work, we work on resilience, so ensuring that communities can overcome and mitigate the effects of climate change, which they're already seeing, disaster response and advocacy as well. And you can see pictures of different kinds of initiatives there. So in the middle, there's the Pan-Amazonian Social Forum, which is an advocacy network to protect the Amazon. Then on the bottom left, you can see the training with the rural communities on climate resilience and agroecology. You can see again there a picture of the peatlands, which appeared in the video. Then we're also working with young people, promoting, depending on the age group, the partner organization starts by promoting biodiversity monitoring, and that involves like getting them to be able to recognize the different trees that are in their environment, and to understand more about their environment, and then leading into environmental monitoring, so things like monitoring the acidity levels in the water and in the soil and all of those things. And then the last picture on the bottom right is showing the agroecology school. We believe that agroecology is a very powerful tool in the face of climate change, and Colombia is really suffering the effects of climate change now. And then lastly, I'd like to touch a bit on peace building and human rights work, as well as gender and inclusion. These are actually separate areas in our work, although gender is also incorporated throughout our work. So that's why I brought them together for this presentation. So like I said, in 2016, a peace agreement was signed between the main guerrilla group and the Colombian government. But there's still ongoing fighting in Colombia between armed groups, mostly over issues related to territorial control. Obviously, the drug trade is also a major issue in that, with the drug cartels fighting also for control of the land. And as I said before, that's one of the reasons why Colombia continues to be one of the most dangerous countries in the world for those who defend human rights. So our partners, we work with several lawyers collectives. We also work with advocacy collectives, and also with those who accompany different victims of different crimes committed mostly during the internal armed conflict. So you can see there the promotion of women's financial autonomy in the center. Then we have a photo on the bottom left on which is a regional forum on business and human rights. Obviously, businesses are are involved in this whole panorama of the use of the land and control of the land as well. Then in the middle, the bottom middle, is a photo from a summit of LGBTI litigants in the Americas. So that's lawyers who are defending the rights of LGBT communities. And then on the right-hand side, some of the work being done on historical memory after the armed conflict. So there's a lot of psychological trauma, a lot of divisions within communities where they found themselves on different sides of the conflict. So really working on those social processes to try and overcome that conflict and those difficulties. And one of the major achievements this year has been the fact that a case is being opened in the special peace jurisdiction on gender-based violence, sexual violence, reproductive violence, and other crimes driven by prejudice. So this is a new development this year. We're really excited that this is happening because it's a real way of reivindicating the rights of the victims and ensuring that there's justice and that there's a right to truth, so that Colombian society can start to look forward and look beyond the conflict to the society that they want to build. So I've put 4 areas there that we're focused on. So we've got gender-based violence, support for local peace and justice actors, and also promoting social and political participation and access to justice to tackle discrimination, social injustice, and all forms of violence. So that's a brief introduction to the work that we're doing, both across the region and specifically in Colombia. And yeah, be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thanks, Nathalie. Thanks very much for that that overview. I can't, there aren't any questions come up in chat anyway yet, and I can't see the other participants to see whether somebody's got his hand raised. But can I ask a question myself?
Yep.
I read somewhere the World Bank says that Colombia is one of the most unequal countries in the world. And can you tell us a little bit more about that? You know, what does that exactly mean, and how does that inequality show itself within, you know, life and society in Colombia? Yeah, sure. So Colombia is, like you say, one of the most unequal countries in the world. So it means that when you're looking at the indicators in terms of gross domestic product, for example, Colombia's not amongst the very poorest. But because of the unequal distribution, there are areas of the country where a large number of people are living in poverty or in extreme poverty. So I think across the country, at least the government statistic is that about 40% of the population are living in poverty. If you're looking at the rural communities, and especially indigenous communities and Afro-descendant communities, that number goes up dramatically. You would really have a very large percentage of the population living in poverty or in extreme poverty as well. Great, lovely. Thanks for that. Right, rhywun arall yn a question? Anybody else got a question? I can't. Roderick, allai ddim a gweld. It's better. Codwch eich dwylo. Put your hands up if you've got a question to ask. Hello. I'm doing a quick run through here.
Robin,
Gareth.
just something. Can you give me some sort of measure of the impact that you're able to make. What you described there seems to me to be a huge mountain of a problem.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering, how impactful can you be in that context?
Well, we have impact on different levels. So firstly, we can talk about the local level. So on the local level, for example, the work with communities and rural families. So for example, the agroecology works to benefit, I think, some 400 rural families. But it also has a larger impact in terms of making sure that healthy produce is available to other people in the community. Then if you're looking at things like, for example, the protection of water sources, like in the peatlands that we looked at, those peatlands provide water to, I think it's about 2 million people. They provide the water that is used by 4 different departments around the peatlands. So that's, you're not working one-to-one with the people in the same way you are at local level, but at the same time, protecting that water source is guaranteeing the vital element for all of those people in the surrounding communities. Then if you're looking at peace building, like for example, those the macro case that I mentioned on sexual and gender-based violence, that's really looking to ensure that the human rights violations that happened during the internal armed conflict don't happen again. So you've got a much wider impact in that. That's just some examples, but I think that shows the different levels of impact that we have.
Thanks so much.
Diolch Gareth, diolch yn fawr. Rwy'n arall a cwestiwn?
Dwi'n sylwi bod gan Eleri Jones I llai fyny, Robin.
Right, Eleri, wi ddim yn gwybod pa sgrin chi yna fan. Eleri, gofynnwch chi'ch cwestiwn.
No, thank you for that presentation. It was very inclusive and very enlightening. I must admit to not knowing much about Colombia before now, except for the fact that it produces a lot of very good coffee. I was just wondering about sort of the different, you're talking about the different groups that you're involved with, and I was just wondering, how easy is it for them to work together? For instance, I know Spanish is the common language, but are there indigenous tribal languages? Is there a different patois spoken by the Afro-Caribbean descendants, for instance? How easy is it for the different groups to work together?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I think there's about 60 indigenous languages in Colombia. So that 4% of the population is then, the 60 different languages within that 4% of the Colombian population. Then there's also different dialects and different kinds of Creole amongst the Afro-descendant community. When we work with particular communities, particular indigenous communities, then we do obviously look to adapting to the language in that community and getting interpreters as needs be. Obviously, it wouldn't really be feasible for us to get everyone from all the different communities together and be able to interpret into all the different languages, but that's our community level work tends to be more localized. So we would look at the specific needs of the community that we were in. and not only linguistic needs, but also cultural differences. There's big cultural differences, especially between, for example, indigenous communities, and amongst the different indigenous communities, there are major cultural differences. So it's also kind of having that that contact with the local facilitators who can help us help to kind of bridge that gap and ensure that that there's inclusion of the different groups and that we're understanding the context that we're in.
Right. Got Tom? Yeah, please, Tom.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. You know, considering the strength of the drug cartels and the movement within the country, how strong or how fragile really is the peace treaty, and you know, is it in danger that that will break down?
Yes, another good question. It's I mean, there has been difficulties with compliance of the peace agreement. So it was signed in 2016. Up until last year, the government was not, the government at that time was not particularly supportive of the peace agreement. So that obviously caused problems because it was in its first stages, and it was a time when the agreement really needed as much support as possible. Well, since last year, there's a government. It's actually the first left-wing government in Colombia's history, which is much more supportive of the peace agreement, and is I think doing its best to follow up on aspects of the peace agreement. Obviously, the issue with the drug cartels is very, very complex, and I think it's, I mean, they're not part of the peace agreement, and this current government has looked to trying to incorporate other armed groups into the agreement. It's been difficult, and I mean, I think it would be very, very difficult to incorporate those kind of armed groups, illegal armed groups, into the agreement. So I think it's really about strengthening indigenous and rural communities and making sure that they have the you know, the strength, the autonomy to be able to you know, continue with their livelihoods. But yeah, it's a really difficult one. I mean, personally, I think advocacy on that issue is key, because I think the demand side of the equation needs to be worked on, and most of the demand is not coming from within Colombia, but from other countries, from the US. So yeah, it's a big problem. Personally, I think that advocacy's got to be key, but at the same time as accompanying and working with rural communities.
Thanks, Natalie. There's a question just come up on chat from Cassie Jones, one of our ministers. It says, you work mainly with women and young people. Where do the men fit into the picture?
Well, we do work with men as well. We don't work exclusively with women and young people. We do work with men as well. So yeah, I mean, I think to say that we do work with men as well, and that it's not exclusively work with women. There's definitely a big gender gap in Colombia in terms of access to rights, in terms of gender-based violence. So that's why a lot of the focus is on work with women, but it's not exclusively with women, and we do also work with men and young men as well. I don't know if that answers your question or if the...
Well, they can always bring in a supplementary. But there's a question, Geraint Rhys, Geraint's got a question. Geraint, beth gyda ti?
Diolch yn fawr iawn ti. Hello, and thanks for running through that. It's a question about the wider international context that I've got at the moment, and I'm looking for some help from you on this. It's not a good time to be seeking charitable support for anything other than what's hitting the news endlessly and looking at the pitiful state of Gaza. And without getting into the rights and wrongs of all that, could you give us a couple of arguments we might need to deploy, but if we're in a meeting and somebody says, oh, hold on, let's not raise money for that because we've got Gaza on our hands at the moment. A couple of good things we can say to make sure this doesn't get derailed.
Well, I think in terms of the environmental arguments, I think are very strong. Colombia's contribution, not just in terms of like the Amazon, for example, but also the peatlands. The peatlands are absorb carbon from the atmosphere. So basically the Colombian ecosystems are doing a job that is of service to the world. Then I think also looking at the context of the armed conflict and the different continued conflicts, like the drug trafficking situation, for example. These are situations that that have a global impact. So I think that recognizing the role of different countries on in relation to the political context in Colombia, I think is really important. Also in relation to the historical links of well, particularly of England in relation to the trafficking of the slave trade and how that you know, we still see people settled in the same areas that they have historically inhabited since that period, and living in contexts of poverty, and so I think that's another link. And then the issue of mining, for example, the Cerrejón mine is the biggest open cast mine in Latin America, and it exports coal to different countries in the region. For example, I know that there's exportation to Ireland, and then with the Ukraine crisis, that demand has increased because of the energy crisis that war has sparked. So yeah, there's many different linkages there, I think, in terms of international trade, in terms of historical colonial history as well, and yeah, the environmental factors that I've mentioned. Like other countries, Colombia is being heavily affected by the by climate change, despite the fact that it's not been one of the greatest contributors to it, and it can play a role in terms of reducing carbon in the atmosphere through the natural biodiversity.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Natalie. Os na rywun arall? Os na rhyw gwestiwn arall gyda rywun? O, Emyr. Mute. A ti.
Do we have specific examples of local communities winning battles against powerful companies with regards to polluting their water supply?
Yeah, so we've got the example of Santorbán, which is in the video. There was a mining company that was trying to come into that peatland, And that would basically, because that peatland provides the water for, I think it's 2 million people in 4 different departments of the country. That was a big threat that the mining would contaminate the water and basically leave people without a water source. So through legal actions and community-led legal actions as well, they managed to suspend that mining license. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a David versus Goliath situation, but there are cases that have been won where which favoured the communities over the interests of large companies. I think also another issue is the issue related to environmental participation. For example, there's a new agreement in Latin America, which it's hoped that would be able to be also replicated in other parts of the world. It's called the Escazú Agreement, and it's related to the right to participation in relation to environmental decisions, to prior consultation, access to information, lots of different rights related to what it means to live in a democracy and the rights of communities in relation to their land. And that was signed by Colombia at the end of last year when the new government came into power. So
great. Well, thank you very much, Natalie. We're coming. We said we'd try and keep it to an hour, and we've done 55 minutes. So very, very grateful to you for what you said, and also for responding to the questions. And I know I've picked up on a couple of things I'm sure which can be helpful when I'm speaking about the appeal. I'm sure other people feel the same as well. We're very, very grateful to you for giving your time and helping us with this appeal. Dim ond, mae eisiau atgoffa chi yn dy fe, chi'mod, bod na adnoddau wedi cael eu paratoi i gyflwyno yr apêl. Yn gwybod ar sy'n wedi derbyn pecyn gyda rai o'r adnoddau ynddo fe, ond mae na lawer mwy ar gael hefyd i'w lawrlwytho o wefan yr undeb. There are many, many resources available for you to promote the appeal and to help you organise your fundraising events in your community. Mae na boster lliwgar yn Gymraeg ac yn Saesneg, mae na daflen ffeithiau sydd yn rhoi ychydig bach mwy o wybodaeth i chi ynglyn â'r pethau sydd yn y ffilm. Mae na gyflwyniad PowerPoint allwch chi ddefnyddio hefyd a'i addasu fel byddwch chi'n dymuno. Mae gweddi'r apêl, a mae Andrew wedi defnyddio darnau o'r weddi yna yn barod ar ddechrau'r cyfarfod heno. A mae'r weddi yna hefyd, mae hwnna'n Gymraeg ac yn Saesneg hefyd gyda llaw i chi lawrlwytho. Ond hefyd mae'r weddi ar gael ar ffurf PowerPoint. Allwch chi gynnwys yn eich cyflwyniad PowerPoint. Mae yna oedfa lawn wedi ysgrifennu, a mae hwnna ar gael i'w lawrlwytho. Mae yna daflen syniadau codi arian ar gael yn Gymraeg ac yn Saesneg i'w lawrlwytho. A fe fydd yna resetiau ar gael hefyd. Os ych chi'n cofio pam wnaethon ni'n neud apêl Madagascar, oedd y resetiau wedi profi'n boblogaidd iawn, a mae yna resetiau o Colombia. Fe fydden nhw ar gael hefyd cyn bo hir i chi gael defnyddio yn eich gweithgareddau codi arian. A'r ffilm, wrth gwrs, y ffilm i ni wedi gwylio yn barod i chi newydd i weld e. A hefyd, os gai ddweud, mae Rodri wedi paratoi ffilm fer, a gallwch chi lawrlwytho hwnna. Ffilm am daith gan grŵp cerddorol o Colombia i Gymru yn ddiweddar, a gyda, yn perfformio gyda Catrin Finch. A dyw e'n hir iawn, ond chymod, mae'n rhoi blas i chi rhywfaint o ddiwylliant Colombia, a hefyd mae'n codi ambell i beth sydd yn berthnasol i rai o'r pethau yma ni wedi bod yn sôn amdanyn nhw heno, a rai o'r meisydd, chymod, i ni'n yn canolbwyntio arnyn nhw gyda'r apêl. Felly, dim ond eich annog chi, ewch ati gynnal eich gweithgarwch, cofiwch gymryd digon o luniau, a rhannwch eich stori. Chi mod rannwch y stori'r digwyddiad a'r lluniau hefyd gyda T. John Penry a gyda'r test fel bod eraill yn cael cyfle i glywed a falle'n cael ei ysbrydoli a'i hannog i gynnal i gweithgareddau hunan. Dyma'r wythfed apêl arbennig i ni wneud fel enwad gyda Cymorth Cristnogol ers 1973. Mae'n hanner cam lwyddiant, hanner cam mlynedd ers yr apêl cyntaf na rai. Chi'n cofio i Zimbabwe, ni wedi codi ar yn i Zimbabwe, i Bangladesh, i ganolbarth America, i Sudan, i Israel a Palestina, i De Affrica, ac i Haiti, a lenni wrth gwrs i ni'n gwneud Colombia. Ac wedi codi yn agos iawn i filiwn o bunnau, jyst trwy'r apeliadau yna. Heb sôn am y gweithgarwch eraill mae'r eglwysi wedi bod yn cefnogi ar hyd y blynyddoedd, bron i filiwn o bunnau. Yn siŵr gallwn ni groesi'r miliwn eleni gyda'r apêl arbennig yma. Felly, ewch ati i gynnal eich gweithgareddau ac i hyrwyddo'r apêl ac i godi arian ar gyfer yr apêl. Os yna rhyw gwestiwn, ymarferol ynglyn â'r apêl i hunan?
Robin, gai nodi un peth?
Allid, a chroeso.
Ond rai pobl yn y cyngor gallu godi ynghylch ffurflen Hodd Gymorth, gift aid.
Gwych,
ia. I ni wedi cael un bellach oddi wrth Cymorth Cristnogol, a geith Rodri gosod i fyny ar y wefan i chi i lawr lwytho i. Yr unig beth mae Cymorth Cristnogol yn gofyn, wrth gwrs, i bod hwnna'n cael ei dychwelyd gyda chyfraniad i D. John Penry felly, ac nid yn uniongyrchol at Cymorth Cristnogol. Ond ffurflen Cymorth Cristnogol yw i, gan mae nhw yn y pen draw yw derbynnydd y rhodd. Ond da fi rannu hwnna gyda Rodri a fi di ar y wefan, a bod chi'n dymuno i'ch lawr.
Ac i John Penry mae'r holl gyfraniadau yn dod yn dweud.
Sorry, di allu ti.
Tom, ti sy'n siarad i fe?
Ie, i T. John Penry fydd yr holl gyfraniadau yn dod yn dweud.
Ie. A cofiwch hefyd wyt ar gael os gallai ddod, os ych chi eisiau fi ddod i siarad am yr apêl, i gwrdd cwarter neu i eglwys, ni cysylltwch a fe na fi'n gore i ddod ato chi, os ych chi'n dymuno. Reit. Os na rhywbeth arall? Dim ond diolch i bawb. Natalie, you still with us?
Yes, I'm still here.
Oh, you're still there? Oh, great. I was hoping you hadn't left us. Just want to thank you once again for giving us your time this evening, and for telling us a little bit about the work in Colombia, and it's going to be very, very useful to us, I'm sure. Diolch yn fawr iawn i'r gweddill hefyd sydd wedi, chymod, bobl sydd wedi trefnu. Diolch i Rodri sydd wedi trefnu'r cyfarfod yma, cyfarfod Zoom yma, ac i Andrew hefyd am y defosiwn agoriadol. A diolch i chi gyd am ddod heno a cefnogi y cyfarfod yma. Be sydd dyn ni ar ôl nawr te?
Diolch yn fawr, diolch.
Diolch, Robin.
Wel, allwn ni, wedwn ni'r gras gyda'r gilydd yna? Ie, i orffen. Gras ein Amen. Diolch i chi.
Diolch yn fawr.
Ystad.
Diolch.